Welcome to the Activate and Illuminate podcast with Mel. I'm your host, Mel, and together we'll be chatting with everyday people living extraordinary lives. So they've learned how to activate their potential and are helping to illuminate others. So I hope you will join me in listening to their journey. And if you like what you hear, and I think you will, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. The world could use a lot more activation and illumination. Have a great day. Today on the podcast is an incredible lady named Dee. We chat about all things mental health. We talk about schizophrenia, a diagnosis, spirituality, condition of whether or not a diagnosis is spiritual gifts or mental health, the failure of pharmaceutical industry to address the root cause. We touch on controversial topics such as timelines and things that'll maybe stretch your understanding a little bit. Belief in magic and miracles being essential to personal growth. Also, the vision of a future where children are nurtured by nature and allowed to explore their spirituality, and building emotional resilience. So this was an absolutely fascinating, mind-opening interview. So be prepared to have your understanding of mental health expanded. Come listen to Dee. Well, you guys, I am honored and excited today to have Darrel-Lynne Thieson. I call her Dee. I know her as Dee, so maybe some of you guys do as well, but I'm excited to have her on today and talk a little bit about what lights us up, what we feel activated about, maybe some of our past experiences in our lives. So I'm going to ask you some questions right out of the gate. Tell us what you feel most passionate about, what you feel most inspired about, what activates you, what illuminates you, and feel free to take as long as you want.
Because that's a loaded question. There's like a whole backstory to what activates me. I would say in a nutshell, maintaining a really strong connection to my spirit team, my spirit guides, to spirit. And that comes from everything that I've experienced, especially over the last decade of my life, which originally formed as a mental health diagnosis and has taken me on this incredible journey of connecting and really learning that I am connected very deeply to spirit and that I need to be maintaining a very strong connection to that. So if you want to, we can kind of break that down a bit more, but this activates me and illuminates me more than anything because it gives me such strong faith and direction and hope that there's guidance so far beyond what we can see in this physical world that's showing us and trying to help us if we're willing to listen and see it for what it's coming through in our lives.
Well, that excites me. I really want to hear about this. And when you said 10 years ago, was there something specific that happened 10 years ago? Or tell us how you came to this inner knowing and how you either accepted it or came to it.
Well, it's actually been more, it's been 12 years. So yeah, more a decade plus a little bit here, which is almost like hard for me to fathom at this point because it's been an incredible journey of unpacking this and processing everything that's happened. But essentially how this came to be was I was in my late 20s. I had achieved some goals of mine that I had for my career. I was working for a high-level executive downtown Edmonton, living in the beautiful apartment, had this wonderful lifestyle that I had built for myself, and I'd felt very accomplished for what I had at that time in my life. My work was paying for my education, so I was back in post-secondary working diligently, although it was going to be a long road towards my goal of an MBA. So I was straddling this high-demand full-time job and night classes and friendships, and mental health was not on my radar at all at that point in my life. 12 years ago, it was a whole different scene and conversation when it came to mental health, even now compared to like just over a decade later, right? So I wasn't aware of all these factors that were contributing to my lifestyle that were actually leading me down a very detrimental road. I had a lot of stress, but I was very fired up and alive with this schooling that I was doing and this purpose that I was finding. But what this degraded me to eventually happening in my life was I found myself in a psychotic episode. So it was a relatively quick thing that came off, but had I known what warning signs to look for, I probably would have. Well, now I can see in retrospect how there were certain things that I was doing that were leading me to this occurring, but it happened relatively quickly. And it essentially led to my life falling apart as I knew it. So, it really came to a pinnacle one day where I went to my office and went to work and I couldn't function. My brain was running at such a high speed, but my body couldn't keep up. I couldn't function. And I had some very grandiose delusions that were far beyond what we would even frame as real or realistic. I just suddenly snapped into this world that wasn't real, but I was still functioning in this realm as we know it. So my reality changed very quickly that day. It led to my boss driving me home, my parents coming, and very quickly realizing I was beyond a place where they could even help me, and a psychologist and police officers showed up at my home and took me to the hospital. And that was the beginning of this journey that I'm talking about, which now I can say 12 years later, I have an incredible respect, understanding, and growing connection with this spirit realm, as I like to say it, or with source, that we have angels, archangels, past loved ones continually sending us messages from the other side. And because of the way that my mental health spiraled and my lack of understanding of what was really presenting, I didn't realize that I was actually being mixed. There was a mix of the science of like, this is an illness, and then the spiritual, and really deciphering what all this was in this journey. So we can continue breaking that down, but that's essentially how this formed. And I guess to kind of tie that into a bow on top is I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. So some very real diagnosis given to me from doctors. And in this duration, I've overcome so many of these limiting labels. I've been able to get to a point where I don't have to be on pharmaceuticals. And I now know, and I'm developing this really beautiful relationship with source and my faith with what's on the other side and what's communicating with me, which we all have access to. It just presents in different ways.
Yeah, 100%. That's fascinating. I've had a few questions come to mind since you started talking, and one of them was when you talked about what was you were doing at the time that this happened and a few things that contributed to it. Can you think of anything that spiraled you into that? And I mean, everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a purpose. So this, this obviously was a huge gift, but can you think of anything at the time that precipitated that or instigated that?
Absolutely. And I've had a lot of time to kind of look back and really, and I'm continually processing. I'm still processing to this day everything that's happened, but some contributing factors were because I was in this elevated state of just energetically elevated because I was working very hard in my full-time job, doing night classes, which includes, all the homework. I was very excited about life at that point in time, and I still am, but it was almost beyond a maintainable and sustainable way that I could function for a long time. So you can equate that to stress. It was a stress, regardless of it's good or bad. It was a stressor that was on my life that I was, I was maintaining it for a prolonged period. And then I was also not sleeping properly. And at the time, I had no idea how important sleep is. Like key component. And I treat sleep with a whole different level of respect now, knowing how, if I let that degrade, how it can impact my mental health. And I've seen that time and time again on pattern in my life since this first episode. So I was also in a very toxic relationship where I was betraying myself for 4 years, trying to pursue the love of this man who would pull away. And, it was very like this tug of war of love. And I was younger and there was an infatuation and I just didn't know how I was going to live without him. So there was that was an added stress that kind of messed with my head, if you will. And so all these contributing factors and then I wasn't paying attention to what I was eating or if I was eating. So lack of sleep. My diet wasn't dialed in. I had a very casual relationship with alcohol and I was betraying certain aspects of myself because I was ignoring what I needed to be doing. And that was to be walking away from that relationship. So, I've even chalked up, and I say that with some reverence, but I have definitely looked back at this experience. And if we want to go back to what my spirit team, and even if you want to say God, what was trying to help me with at that time it was giving me the absolute biggest reroute to say, let's get you on the path you're supposed to be on, right? I didn't know and see it that way at the time. But like you said, this is an incredible gift. So despite the fact that it was wrapped in a lot of trauma and just incredible and insanely weird things, because, the hospital is no joke either. The Western medical system's no joke. These diagnoses are no joke. But it also expedited my growth. And I believe that at that time, although I was in such a beautiful space in the sense of all these things that I had accomplished in my life, I believe that this was to expedite my growth because I was not catching certain life lessons that I needed to be at that point. So it said, you know what? We're on a timeline here, whether you like it or not, we got to go. So it expedited that greatly, and it has continued to since that time.
So do you think that this boy was placed, I'll call him a boy.
Yeah, he's 10 years older than me, but yes, a boy regardless.
Do you think this boy was placed in front of your life as an accelerator?
Yeah, he was, for many reasons. He was a teacher. I didn't know that that's what he came into my life to be, but I learned so much from that relationship and what it offered me in terms of lessons, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us about these spiritual gifts. What do you know now, and what do you perceive now that you didn't before?
Yeah, so there's this, it's interesting. So I'm still learning about these things too, to be super transparent, because it's going to be a lifelong journey of really tapping into these gifts. One for sure is clairaudient. So I get certain sounds, noises are like that's just signs for me to listen to. When I was in episodes, like full-blown episodes, I would have voices in my head, like actual voices talking to me, which when I was in these episodes, which I've had 2 major episodes, both of them lasted about a year. So 2012, 2016, and I had a brief one this year for a couple months, although I know how to harness them so much better than I used to. But the voices appeared in each of those episodes. And keep in mind, when you're in these psychotic episodes, it's not like they just form under, like they include characters from your life. Like it's a whole, like in my mind, I was in a movie. So everyone was kind of acting in this movie, like Truman Show. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie The Game with Michael Douglas. It's kind of a mix of those two. That was my experience. But when these voices presented, classic schizophrenic kind of symptom, if you will, I look back now and I see that I was being infiltrated. The veil kind of drops, first of all, when you're in these states. Reality is quite different than how we see it. But when you're in this state, I feel like the veil is very thin between what us as humans and the spirit side. So I was open and very vulnerable. I say I was an open vessel to good and bad spirits coming in and communicating with me. And I think in that state, at least there, and this is purely speculative because I'm only speaking from what I know and what I've experienced, but from these states, it's likely that the voices are you're more penetrable. Anyway, they can access you a lot easier, which is why when I'm not in a psychotic episode, the clairaudient kind of goes away, like the intense voices goes away. And it's more signs from like things clicking, or like you hear a conversation and there's certain messages coming through. And this is proven, like clairaudience, this is how clairaudience works. I also have a strong intuition, and there's a clair for that as well. And like I said, I'm still learning the actual terms that people use for these. Clairvoyant is the most common one I think we hear, but I get a strong knowing. And I'm learning because I didn't have boundaries with the spirit world. I was an open vessel, and I was vulnerable to both good and bad. And I believe there is both. I didn't have strong boundaries with that, and I didn't know what to listen to. So I listened to everything. So developing those boundaries has been super important, and I'm still learning how to do that as well. But it degraded my trust. And at that time, I'm learning how to trust these signs and symbols and voices and however you want to say it that are coming in now, so I can use them to my betterment and to perhaps other people's betterment as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. As you're saying that, I feel like when you say you're learning to trust the voices, learning to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Learning to trust yourself. So when you have these voices and you say they're good and they're bad and they're, represent different things, do you feel like, I feel in conversations that I've had with people and people that have had similar experiences, I feel like very sensitive souls are being targeted. We are in a war of light against dark right now. And I feel like, regardless of what you call it, whether it's, political, whether it's just, all the different things that are happening, but I personally believe that we're in a spiritual war, and it's like it's up to us to maintain our spiritual frequencies and vibrations high enough that we become, that we're sovereign. The word that springs to mind, I don't want to necessarily say it, but our whole purpose in life is to maintain our vessel of light. And so when I hear you talk about that, and like the good forces and the bad forces, what are the tools that you have learned in the last few years to strengthen that and to strengthen your inner knowing, and to know that you have this, you essentially have the keys, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
It's a delicate dance. It really is. And I think because I have this experience of polarities of knowing what life was before, and then going to this hyper extreme of just unexplainable experiences, and then having the hindsight to be able to process that and come out of it, which not everyone does, especially when they're diagnosed with schizophrenia. I can see where I was when I was listening to everything, because I thought I was being directed, and, there was a story around what I was being told to do, let's say. I can see now where, and I've also been learning tools, so I will get to that, but I can see where I was betraying myself in things that I was doing where they were just outlandishly crazy. Like putting myself in very compromising situations where, let's call a spade a spade. I could be dead right now based on the things that I was told I should do, and I did. Just rationally, common sense looking at this, if we're listening to the good, the love, it's not going to put us in harm's way. It's not going to be compromising that inner knowing. And I point at my heart because it's love. And that the thing that makes us feel good, and the thing that doesn't make us like say, hold on a second, there's this, and people use this word all the time, discernment. I'm really learning how to use discernment in my life, knowing that I have a very high sensitivity to, obviously, this other realm we can't see that's right there. So discerning, how do I feel? If I was listening to this and I take action on this, how will I feel? How do I feel as I receive this message? And then learning how to trust that and not deny the things that maybe I need to be listening to. And this could be a rabbit hole type of discussion, but it's like a dream state in our head while we're awake. So just because we're seeing something and hearing something, we have these built-in emotions and things that want to try to define it and put a label on it. But when really it's a sign that might be bringing us to somewhere completely different. And that's just like dream analysis when you wake up in the morning and you maybe write down, okay, I saw this and this and this, and you don't know for like 3 or 4 days why you saw these things. That same thing is happening while we're awake, as far as I'm concerned. So not judging those thoughts, but being with them and taking time, and which brings me to, if you want to talk about the war of light and darkness, one of the biggest weapons that the darkness is using is distraction. It's distracting us from silence, from that inner peace we need to find every single day, that listening, that attuning, right? So I have really tried to incorporate these tools where I am sitting in silence, if you want to call it meditation, listening, just listening to what my body and my mind and what my dreams are saying. That is like an incredible place to start, because if we're just sitting on social media or our phones or our emails or watching the TV or watching the mainstream news and every single distraction of consumerism that they're throwing at us, darkness is winning because we're not listening to us, right?
100% agree. I feel like the distractions of our world, I happen to live in the middle of nowhere. And, as the last few years happened, I found myself retreating more and more into my own space. And I always enjoyed it before, and I always enjoyed the silence. But often I don't have music playing. I don't have anything. I drive in my car with no music unless it's an intentional something that I want to listen to. And I find that's the time and the space that miracles happen.
It's true.
That is the time and the space that we are creating with our own thoughts. And so if we're not in our own thoughts, actually being intentional with the creation of them, it's like we're being pulled all over the road by somebody else steering the wheel.
100%.
And so I 100% agree with you, and I 100% know what you're saying. To people that may be feeling themselves being distracted and not knowing how to get out of it, like what's a few tips and tricks that you use when you know you're being impacted? When you know that you're like, nope, everybody out of my head. I just need to, get back to myself. What do you do?
I mean, that's a practice in itself, right? Because, again, to go back to what I've experienced is, people talk about boundaries a lot, right? I didn't even realize I needed to have boundaries with the spirit world until I was like in it, right? I was like, actually, it wasn't until after I was in it where I'm like, I have zero boundaries. So if I don't have boundaries with the spirit world, how are my boundaries looking in the physical world? Do a quick audit, not so good. I was betraying my energy left and right. So I would say do an audit of your life, like literally do an audit of your day, do an audit of your week. How often are you giving away your energy to other people when you don't have enough and you're not, and you're just, and like, it's an attunement that it takes some time, right? Because not only did I need to work on boundaries, I needed to work on boundaries with my phone, with my text message, because now people can reach us instantaneously and we have this device in our pockets everywhere we go. So boundaries with our devices. I mean, and then tuning into the escapism. I was doing a lot of escaping. And there was probably a couple of years for sure where I was so overcome with how much I had been impacted through everything I had been through, where I didn't deal with it at all. I escaped to food, which I was on meds at that time, so I put weight on much faster. I escaped to, my phone. There was even side effects from the medications that made certain things more addictive for me, which led to, some catastrophic things happening in my personal life. So are you escaping? You have to listen to yourself, though. Like, you literally have to know you to know what you're doing, right? And I think a lot of people are running on autopilot. And to just tie back in what I brought up initially about what lights me up and what illuminates me and activates me is having that connection with spirit. Because like you said, when you're in your car and you're just in the silence, that's where the magic happens. Absolutely. Because if we are truly attuned and listening and watching and using our eyes, we can receive so many directions and messages from our spirit team that is love on the other side, trying to help us on our life path, the contract we came in to live, if we're listening. Not a lot of people, and I mean, I don't want to generalize, because I feel like there is this huge raising of vibration that's happening right now, although there is a lot of being bogged down in this energy, this density of darkness. But the people that are in that really dense, dark, distracted, numbing life, they're missing out on all the gifts that are leading them to their, if you want to call it dharma, however you want to define that. And our spirit team is like right behind us saying, hey, if you just listen to me, I've got some messages for you. That's magic, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So do you feel like we are people say, oh, we get to create our life. Do you feel like we're creators of our life, or that our lives are pre-created for us and we're living out a destiny?
Good question. So for my first episode back in 2012, I had a word come across my line of sight, and it was kismet. Kismet is I believe it's rooted in Turkish, but it means destiny or fate. And I was lit up by this word. I had visions of just like beautiful visions of like, I don't know, at the time I really wanted to have like a spiritual camp for kids. I was like, I'll call it Camp Kismet. And I ended up getting Kismet tattooed on me. So destiny, fate, it's this notion that, we are predestined to something. So I do have kind of a contradictory take on that. And I say destiny, fate, but we make our own. Because I think every day we have a series of choices we can make that are going to determine where we end up. And I mean, you could go back to like the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, it's about like parallel realities, but there's essentially this character, and she could be anything. She could be the most famous classical pianist. She could be a dancer, all these things. We could go down any one of those roads and become and really realize our genius within us, right? Our dharma. But it's going to depend on the series of choices we make in our everyday lives. And if we're living lives where our emotions are being steered by external forces, like what's happening with the government, what's happening in the news, what's happening with the stock market, we don't have our power. So then your destiny is whatever that energy is feeding, as far as I'm concerned. And then the alternative is, if we're attuning, listening, paying attention, then we get to elevate to a more beautiful place with a more beautiful outcome. That is the destiny. We make our own. But the destiny, I do believe at the very end, is we all go to the same place in some way.
So do you believe in timelines?
I've been playing with this more. I do. I've even had like some certain theories even about what happened with me and the episodes that I was in, where maybe I was living in this physical reality, but I was acting out in a different timeline. That was one of my theories, because it felt like that could have been what was happening. And I do think maybe we're all living in this, people refer to the higher self, our soul self. We could be living out a whole other reality in our higher selves with each other, and we're just not aware. And I've had visions of those interactions with other people in my life where I feel like my higher self is interacting with them, but not in this 3D physical world we know. So, possibly.
How do you feel about the effects of, when you talk about this psychosis?
Yeah.
And being, hospitalized and, basically picked up.
Yeah.
Right? To me, like when I think about then what would happen to you, it would be, I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it like a multitude of traumas that then get placed on you, be it pharmaceutical, be it, constraint-wise, be it, whatever. How do you think the pharmaceutical industry is playing a role in dampening us down right now?
No, that's again, fire question, because the way I perceive what happened to me is, and I kind of think if I want to talk about an alternative timeline, let's say this happened, but I was in a culture or society where when these symptoms present, maybe a shaman or a elder takes you and they help you harness these gifts. And then that becomes that is your healing tool for others as well. You learn how to heal yourself by harnessing this incredible force that is within you and this sensitivity that obviously exists. And then that becomes your tool to help others. I kind of fantasize about, had that been my reality, how different things would have played out, but that wasn't my reality. So first of all, schizophrenia is not actually well defined or understood at all. And you'd have to talk to someone that really has studied that. But from my general understanding, it's just woefully inadequate how they understand it. So they just base it on a certain number of symptoms. So they're looking at symptoms, they're not looking at root cause. And then they're just trying to pair up the best medication I say best medication, quote unquote. It's so they're just trying to figure out ways to dampen these symptoms. So that is a numbing in itself. And I experienced this numbing firsthand. I was put through a series of different medications. Although my symptoms were very intense and very difficult to deal with, I was in such a fortunate situation that I was classified as high functioning. And I would agree, I'm very high functioning. I can live in this like weird alternate reality, and I can live in this reality where I can maintain a conversation and kind of look like a normal functioning person, although not all the time when I'm in those episodes. So with that, I was able to advocate for myself. If they put me on something, I was able to say, no, this does this, I hate how I feel. It would, and there was some really damning side effects from like arguably minor things like constipation, which I wouldn't say is minor at all, to a complete numbing where they just don't want you to experience any highs and lows, to like putting me on anti-seizure medication, which there's a particular medication that is for anti-seizure, but they use for schizophrenia as well. But in this whole process, they're not treating root cause, and they're numbing people out, and they're just trying to dampen these symptoms. Now, if we lived in that alternative timeline where this is a gift, they're essentially slapping you with this label saying there's something wrong with you, and medicating you for the rest of your life. That's their intention, and that's what they assumed they assumed that's what would happen to me as well. But because I was able to overcome this, not just once, but multiple times, and advocate for myself and have a certain wherewithal where I could find a quote unquote baseline, I have been able to live with well, it was a process, but to eventually come off medications and get out on the other side and look at it. And I would say I'm quite few and far between in the grand scheme of things. And so what this system is just, as we know, what the pharmaceutical industry is, it's a money machine, and it's just keeping people in this infinity loop of insanity and not actually helping them to heal from the inside out, and to actually, if we were living in an idyllic world, realize what was happening is some sort of gift if we know how to access it and work with it. That's what I would say.
Bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Bingo. So do you feel like schizophrenia and the voices? I recently heard schizophrenia labeled as, and I was listening to this guy speak from the UK who was essentially talking about how he was in prisons and interviewing all these people with schizophrenia, and he'd worked in the psychotherapist for about 30 years. And he said the voices are always telling them certain things. Do you feel like what you have just overcome is listening to negative entities? Like, do you feel like it was an entity attachment? Do you feel like you've learned how to just deal with these energetics? Or is that how you feel that it was?
Well, I know which interview you're referring to. I did listen to it. I felt it was an incredibly important conversation that they had, and what he brought forward was like not many people are talking about. So I appreciated it for that. I think, however, it was missing certain elements of, like, I think it can be good and bad. And I think it was heavily weighed on, like, the people that he was exposed to that were experiencing these symptoms were being communicated with, were exposed to more negative entities. But I would also say our lifestyle factors, our choices that we make, are probably influencing the types of energies we're inviting into. So, in hospital, because I was hospitalized multiple times, I was around people that were also diagnosed with schizophrenia or iterations of, heard voices, however you want to say that. I feel like if someone has been exposed to the darkness, like they're shooting heroin, or there's some, there's a lot of trauma in their past, I think that they're maybe predisposed to honestly being accessible by these darker forces. I don't have that in my life. Like, I came from a very good, solid upbringing. I was never addicted to any sort of drugs. My spiral came from stress and just lack of sleep. And there was a lot of factors, but it wasn't from drug addiction, drug-induced psychosis. It wasn't from this heavy trauma that I carry from my childhood. So I do want, and I don't have the answer to this, but I do know that, like, from my own experience, I think there are people that are being accessed by good and bad, not just bad. But I'm sure if you're in like a hardcore psych facility that maybe even is like a lockdown, or these are criminals, they're probably not getting the best messages at that point. But I would also argue that they probably have the ability to be accessed by good.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think it's worth looking at if they can, right?
Yeah, 100%. I also think people that hold a large amount of light are being targeted. So,
Yeah.
Whether or not, you had a choice in that moment, and you had the potential to have your life go a different, medicated, numbed out way.
Yeah.
And
if, yeah.
right?
And most of us trust that system. I mean, I say that loosely. It's just most of us know if we go to the doctor and they give us something, that's the solution. That's what we believe. But I didn't believe that was the solution. So that wasn't my answer, right?
I think that's key what you just said there. You didn't believe it was your solution, so that wasn't your answer.
That's right. Most people believe that's the solution, right?
Right? And then when you believe something's a solution, you look for it and you try to find ways to fit it in and to make it your answer.
Right. And we could, sorry to interrupt, but we could draw parallels. And I want to say this cautiously, but just for the sake of consideration for what we're saying. Like, let's say someone's diagnosed with cancer and they're given 6 months to live and we have to do this, and this, all like very toxic to our system, but this is the only way. And then they're given this death sentence and that's where their mind goes. That's where their belief goes. And then that's going to drive the ship, right? Just as much as someone who's given the same diagnosis and they go and do, partake in, say, Dr. Joe Dispenza's work and find alternative measures to treat whatever's happening inside of them, and they eradicate the cancer and they live for more years as opposed to 6 months. It's the belief of whether or not you can overcome it and the belief in the tools that you're using to overcome it. Now, I don't want to say what I had is anything like cancer. I want to be careful about how I'm saying that, but I believe I had the wherewithal and understanding and the choice to see that and not be and not fall victim to the life sentence that they were trying to give me, and to honestly, excuse my French, give them a giant fuck you. So yeah.
So I saw you light up a little while ago. And I didn't expand on it further, but when you talked about kids and like a camp for kids or helping others. So have you gone into the space of how you may use some of these personal gifts and personal tools to help others, or are you just kind of swimming in the possibilities? Or is it even
tearing up just thinking about it, honestly? Because I mean, at the time when I thought about Camp Kismet, I had no idea what was about to happen in my life and what direction I was going. I hadn't experienced any of this yet. I just was lit up by this concept of, and what that was rooted in was when I was a young person, like a child. I went to summer camp. My parents weren't religious. They're just like, go to camp. But most of the camps were Christian camps, very Bible oriented. Didn't really understand it much, but there were just things that happened that felt very limiting to me. So I thought, man, what if we could have a place where kids could come and we teach them about like the beauty of gardening and like talking to plants and hugging trees and talking to horses, but removing any like dogma or labels that just might confuse a child as well. So I had this vision of this camp. And so now, after I've been completely rerouted a few times and as my path continues to evolve and shift, I'm in this place where I'm still deciphering and understanding what I really should be doing with my experiences and how I can help others. It starts with having conversations just like this, though. So thank you. But I think in the long term, I think what makes me the most emotional is the vision of that camp for kids isn't just mine, I think. I think that's the vision of where we can be as a collective if we learn to honor the planet and the gift that we are given of this life, this divinity that lives within us. If we can invest that into our kids and teach them the ways, that is Camp Kismet. And maybe it's not just this camp I own on some farmland out in the country or, next to a lake, but it's what we can do with this planet. That doesn't happen with just one person. That's the collective. So, yeah, if I can be part of that, that would be amazing. Yeah.
I have no doubt that you will be.
Thank you.
So all these gifts and all these revelations and different things that have come to you over the last few years. And I mean, I'm sure you would agree with me that we have been in a phase of so many institutions and so many systems kind of breaking down.
Yeah.
What excitement do you have for the next few years and in seeing stuff like this rebuilt? And how do you think people will feel in the next few years versus how we felt under some of these, the weights of some of these really psychological warfare on us for the last few years?
Yeah.
Or many, many years, I believe anyway. That's just
Yeah.
my perception.
I would agree. It's because it's a culmination, and this doesn't happen overnight. This was a systematic and progressive thing that we've built that now we have to take down. Knowing humans, people like to say humans don't like change, right? So that's a common belief people hold. We don't like change. So I see a lot of people are going to probably grip to their ideologies, their beliefs, but what we are in, the way I perceive it, and I know I'm not alone in this, is we are in extreme labor pains right now. And I personally haven't labored. I know you have. It doesn't sound like the most beautiful experience. It can be loud, it can be painful, it can be traumatic for not just the mother, but what's coming from that. So I mean the baby, but it's traumatic for all parties. But the beautiful thing that comes from it is the possibility of new life and new growth. So I see what we're in right now is honestly, the very beginning stages of some incredible labor pains. That's why we need that feminine to be supporting this so strongly right now too. And this elevated, beautiful light energy, the doulas of this world that are essentially helping doula this new age, if you will. What comes from that is entirely on us. I want to have faith, and I do have faith, and I pray that there's something better that's going to come from this. I just hope that the claws and the evil of society that are currently gripping so many people aren't too deep. And whatever needs to fall away that can and will fall away and doesn't follow us. And that we learn from history, ideally for once. Honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you could give in thinking about back to being a young child, or maybe it's you, maybe it's another child, if you could give, yourself as a child or someone else the most important advice that you could give, what would it be?
Okay. I'm giving advice to a child.
Yeah, or to yourself as a child. If you could, tell yourself anything, that you could have known back when you were a child that you feel like would help you in your life, what would it be?
I mean, I'll be honest, I've had this way of retaining a lot of the wonder and joy that I always had as a youngster. I've also been through a lot of life lessons, and I have the knowledge and wisdom now that I didn't have. If you can, and I love that actually, this is so full circle, because if you can retain that light of wonder and curiosity and belief that anything is possible, I honestly think that is going to serve you so much as you grow. Because if you can retain that heart of a child, things won't make you hardened. They won't make you angry. That is love, right? So retaining that love of this gift that we've been given. And then, I mean, something else is I would tell myself to believe in God. I would. Not this God that's got very convoluted through all these different religions that essentially boil down to the same thing of this ultimate creator. But believe in the God that is within all of us, and the God that we can't see that is creating all of this. The beautiful love God. I would say believe in magic, believe in miracles, because that is what God is. He lives in the miracles. He lives in the magic. He lives in the love and the belief. Yeah. And the curiosity and the wonder, right? Yeah.
Well, what an honor, Dee.
Thank you.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap this up because, I mean, what could be more of a poignant message than believe in the love?
Believe in the love.
And I started this by asking you what lights you up. And I believe like we just ended on what lights you up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, you are so welcome. And we will, of course, include with the show notes at the bottom and how people can get a hold of you or reach out to you and, be part of any other future projects that you are involved in. And whatever it is that you would like us to promote for you, we certainly will. And thank you for being part of this. And you really, truly have been an activated and illuminated podcast guest. So thank you. And we will see you soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye.